Hi, everybody. My name's Erin. I'm the marketing manager for Decentralized Energy Canada. And I wanted to give a quick introduction to Impact Careers, which is the overarching program of today's webinar, which encourages everybody to take action and choose a career in sustainability. A little bit about Decentralized Energy Canada. So we're a national industry association dedicated to the development of decentralized energy. We have roughly 100 members that span all the way from startups up to large corporations and everybody in between. Our bread and butter is connecting our members to business development opportunities and also project development opportunities, both nationally and globally. If you have any questions or want to check out our website, you can go to deassociation.ca. And a little bit about why we're putting on Impact Careers and what this webinar is about today. So our main goal is to help identify the jobs of the future and how the UN's SDGs are going to be integrated into the job market. And our main goal is to connect job seekers to sustainable employers. Today's webinar is going to be focused on SDG12, which is responsible consumption and production. And I wanted to give a quick thank you to our program partners. This whole program would not be possible without you guys. Schneider Electric, EHRC, Women in Power, and Alberta Innovates. And that's it for me. My information is up on the screen if you'd like to get in contact with me. But without further ado, I will pass it off to John to start off the panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Erin. And welcome everyone to the latest in the DEC sessions here today. It's my pleasure to act as the sort of host and moderator today of the panel. For those of you who may not know me, or if we haven't met in a different forum prior to being in the COVID lockdown from our home offices, I'm John Rylett. I am the Vice President of Innovation and Clean Tech with the Delphi Group. But I've also been involved with Decentralized Energy Canada for quite a while now, back in the double zeros even, is where I first met the organization. But I also have the current pleasure of being the chair of the DEC board. So very well connected to the group and active in their activities as they move forward and try to improve, I'll say, sustainability, but also the profile of decentralized energy here in Canada through various programs and initiatives. So with that, we're going to launch right into it. Today's discussion is really about the circular economy, and just by way of setting the stage here, for those of you who maybe are new to this, but as it's described, somewhat perhaps self-explanatory, we want to look at a new way of doing things. We want to move away from the linear economy where we extract resources or have, sort of virgin resources. They get made into a product, used and discarded as waste. We really need to look at how we Canadians, but we as a civilization here on our planet, which of course is finite, make better use of the materials, the products, and all the resources that we have to ensure longer term sustainability. The once through process really has a lot of shortcomings to it. We need to get beyond those, and we need to start thinking about how we reincorporate back into our economy things that today we typically look at as waste, right? Stuff that we go to discard, throw away, move on to buy the next new one or get the next new thing. How can we improve that? How can we take waste and recycle it, but not even recycle it, but upcycle it? One of the challenges, of course, is that today we recycle and products tend to move down the proverbial food chain, if you will. They become lower quality or less valuable, and we need to figure out how to change that as well, so that we are upcycling. We're using materials back into high value uses or higher value uses, or at least the same value that they were before they became waste, in essence. So circular economy, that is going to be today. And with me today, I have a great panel of people who are much more involved in this than I am. I just get to direct some of the conversation. Very quickly, I will introduce the panel, and maybe folks give a little wave as I say your name and your title, and then we'll jump into some actual introductions from everybody as we go. So first off, if Adrienne Nguyen, if you could give a little wave. So Adrienne, she is a sector specialist in climate resiliency and sustainability with the Standard Councils of Canada. So welcome, Adrienne. Good to see you here. Next up, we have Jordi van Osch, who is the co-founder and CTO of the group Chainable. And Jordi is actually joining us from the Netherlands today. So his electrons are coming from the furthest away to be part of our conversation. Really looking forward to getting some European perspective on this. Next up, we have Žarko Mazelja, who is the CTO and director of American Manganese Inc. Apologies for the stumbling on the name there. Joining us today, particularly interest in batteries, I believe, and where they're going in the future and what we can do with them. And last but not least, colleague of mine, Paul Shorthouse, who is the Senior Director of Green and Circular Economy with the Delphi Group. So welcome, everyone. Great to have you all here today. So I've given you all a quick introduction, but perhaps going back around the table again, we'll go in the same order. If you could each take a couple minutes and just explain your role with your organization in this space. So Adrienne, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, John. Hi, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel. My name is Adrienne Nguyen, and I work at the Standards Council of Canada. So we are a federal crown corporation based in Ottawa and part of the portfolio of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. We're also Canada's national standards body. So we represent Canada at ISO, which is the International Organization for Standardization, as well as IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Commission. We coordinate voluntary standardization in Canada. We accredit labs and certification bodies, verification bodies, as well as standards development organizations. So basically, we provide oversight of voluntary standards in Canada. And reason why I'm kind of part of the discussion today is I've been exploring what the standardization system can do to really facilitate and hopefully accelerate solutions for the circular economy. So as we transition to circularity in different sectors, what standards and conformity assessment solutions might we need to make that happen? So that's kind of my role and my perspective for today's panel.
Excellent, excellent. Welcome. Jordi, you are next.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jordi. I'm co-founder and CTO of the Dutch startup Chainable. And with Chainable, we provide circular kitchens for the business-to-business housing market in the Netherlands. And yeah, the kitchens are not round, but they are circular. And what we do is basically where the status quo of kitchens is a chipboard kitchen that lasts 15 to 20 years. That's not modular and that can't be taken apart. So in that status quo, every kitchen that is produced today is being destroyed, mostly burned 15 to 20 years down the line. We chose a different path. We have a steel frame as a base for a kitchen. So therefore, the frame of the kitchen basically lasts 60 years. And we have panels that we click on the outside. So we give the kitchen a shell. And in that way, we basically provide a refurbished kitchen every 20 years. So we can really easily refurbish the kitchen whenever needed. And therefore, we have a much lower material need during the lifespan of the kitchen. And because we want to make sure that all the kitchens come back to us, we only provide our kitchens to kitchen as a service. And kitchen as a service basically means that we want to maintain the residual value in the kitchen for the whole lifespan. So we take care of all the service and maintenance during that lifespan. And after usage, we take back all the kitchens that we have placed to make sure that all the materials in the kitchen go back to the producer.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jordi. Žarko, you're next. If you could give us a little introduction to American Manganese.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the panel. So I'm Žarko Mazelja, CTO and Director of American Manganese, and we've developed the patented and closed loop recyclable process, which is the upcycling of lithium-ion battery cathode material. So with the increasing demand of electric vehicles and portable electronics, obviously comes a necessity for recycling those materials as well. And our process is currently focusing on closing that loop and building a model, building that circular economy model, for production waste, end of life EV batteries, end of life portable electronics as well. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, and we're happy to have you. We're going to come back and visit those topics quite a bit more today, because as we see EVs, particularly EVs, but all the other components that we use in the world coming along, and battery storage, we do hear about this topic a lot. So I think it's going to be a very good one. Last but not least, Paul, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Thanks, John. Yes, as mentioned, I'm a colleague of yours at the Delphi Group. We're a strategy consulting company. We focus on climate change, corporate sustainability, clean tech, and the area that I lead up, which is our green and circular economy work nationwide. I also wear the hat as Managing Director of Circular Economy Leadership Canada, which is a network of nonprofit, research, think tanks, and corporate leaders in Canada advancing circular economy. We're really focused on building out the circular economy ecosystem here in Canada. We've been leading on an initiative to build a circular economy strategy and an innovation network for Canada, and focus on sector transitions and sector roadmap or pathways through our Circular Economy Solutions series work streams, where we have activities going on in mining and metals, and in construction and built environment, and in food systems, and working really closely with the Canada Plastics Pact around the plastic space and around supply chain competitiveness.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. And so actually, I'm going to launch straight in with you, because I think that's a great segue into sort of the first thing that I wanted to talk about or ask about, which is just like, how circular are we today? And, from the Canadian perspective, you're obviously well linked in. We hear about it, we talk about it. Where are we starting from?
Yeah, well, we have a long way to go. We're talking about a major sort of system change and transition in that sense. So there's an organization out of the Netherlands, actually, Circle Economy, that every year publishes a gap report, essentially assessing how circular our global supply chains are. And they found that we're actually heading in the wrong direction. We're about 8.6% circular right now, and we're at 8.9 a few years back. That means that out of all the resources we extract every year, and there's about 100 tons of 1 million tons that are extracted every year of resources, only about 9% of those get cycled back at the end of life. About 2/3 of our resources are lost as wasted materials or pollution into the environment, whether it's landfills or plastics in the ocean, or emissions into the atmosphere. I think what that really represents is a huge lost economic opportunity, which I think is what gets people excited about circular economy. But when you bring it back to Canada, we really lack a good understanding of our baseline of circularity. We don't have solid metrics. We don't have great performance indicators in place right now to actually track how circular we are. We do know that we're one of the largest generators of waste per capita, about 2.2 kilograms per day per person. Quebec undertook a circularity gap report and found that they were about 3.5% circular, so less than the global average. And so Canada has yet to do that. But CELC, we are looking to undertake a circularity gap report for Canada, and are working with Circle Economy to bring the stakeholders together to do that.
Okay, so maybe I'll try and put the sunny side on it. There's lots of opportunity.
Lots of opportunity.
We have about 90+% opportunity here, perhaps. But maybe just to juxtapose this, because Jordy's with us today, and you did mention the report out of the Netherlands. Jordy, can you juxtapose that a little bit to the Netherlands and the area that you work in terms of how it, compared to Canada? Oh, I think you might be on mute, Jordy.
Lost sound.
we'll have to see if we can get him back, perhaps in a minute or two. We'll see what happens. Okay, maybe while I'll just say, Jordy, if you get your sound back, just hop in and let us know. But because we can come back and get sort of the European perspective. But maybe we'll move into the next question here, which is really to sort of talk about some human behavior in terms of, I'm just going to start there, right? Like, is this a problem of just people don't recycle, people aren't interested? What are we seeing out there? Zarko, I'm going to throw the question to you. What do you see in your space in the circular economy? Is this a human behavior thing, or are there other core components that we're going to need here to go forward?
Yeah, well, up until recently, with the huge demand for electric vehicles, most of the batteries we've used have been in portable electronics, and I'm sure all of us have some kind of iPhone or mobile device or something in the drawers that really hasn't gone out to recycling, and we're not really aware to where to even send it. And with that, once we do like recycling most of our household products, we don't really follow that to the very end, so we don't really know what happens. So I think that shift, especially for electric vehicles, will happen more on the producer responsibility, taking away from the consumer, and having that extended producer responsibility, where if they're selling you the vehicle as well, they're also responsible for the battery. And I think it's better off for those companies as well, because they can now cycle this material back into the remanufacturing of new cells, new cars, which plays a part on the environment, but also the critical supply of these materials. So it benefits in many ways.
Okay, interesting. I'm just going to check and see if Jordy is back with us. Unfortunately, I still can't hear him. I'm going to assume that others can't. Okay, well, we'll see. Oh, hold on.
There we go.
There, he's back. Okay, yes. So Jordy, I'll circle back to you. Yeah, and maybe just okay, a little perspective on the Netherlands in terms of how circular is the Netherlands.
Yeah, so for our industry, we're not circular at all. We're trying, but our competitors are just doing the same old. But for the nationwide, the circularity gap report does say that we're currently at 24.5%. So you could say that that's good. We're definitely above the global average. But at the same time, the low-hanging fruit is gone. So there needs to be, I believe, policy changes to actually make the next step. As Zarko already said, like, really producer responsibility, I think, is the key. You can't blame consumers for living their lives. So I think producer responsibility and convincing companies that actually taking products back and that to teach them that they're responsible for the stuff they make will eventually, get us to the next level in the Netherlands too.
Okay. Well, that actually gives us a great segue then, is to perhaps, if we're consumers aren't going to do this on their own, or can't, or maybe don't have the knowledge. It does bring up that question. Well, what's the role of government in this? And perhaps Adrian, I'm going to lean your way now, just being codes and standards, obviously a big part of various government programs in all sorts of ways. Just curious, get some insight from you into, if we move away from, consumer choice or consumer behavior into, government role of codes and standards and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first and foremost, the role of government is to provide a level playing field for everyone and to set the parameters for every kind of business, organization, and household to do their part. The market signals have to be right, the price signals have to be right, and government should set the vision and what we're trying to drive at, the outcomes. But it should be up to individual companies and organizations and households to determine how they're going to get there. So there should be space for innovation in the right direction and towards the right things. So I think that's the most important role of government. In terms of standards, standards are voluntary by default. So we, at Standards Council of Canada, we facilitate the development of standards, but those don't automatically become rules or laws. They have to be referenced in legislation, referenced in policy, or referenced in procurement decisions in order for them to become mandatory. So what we do at SCC is we work with governments at different levels, so federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal, to look for ways that standards can support the aims of governments and regulators. The nice thing about standards is, well, the standards, the National Standards of Canada, and what we call consensus standards is that they are, well, they're built by consensus. So we make sure that there is a good representative of interests around the table before the standard is even kicked off. And we make sure that it's written in a very collaborative and consensual way, so that when the standard is published, it's market ready. It reflects already the views of different interests. And this means that governments don't have to spend so much time doing consultations, that you already have a standard that has those agreements baked in. And those are very useful tools. So that's a bit of kind of what government and also what a standards body like SCC could do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So maybe Paul, I'm going to come to you just quickly, because we sort of Standards Council of Canada, you're heavily involved with a Canada-wide industry group and association. So again, sort of same question: role of government, role of standards within the Canadian context.
Yeah, I think Adrian's spot on in terms of the role government needs to do to set the table, so to speak. I think they play that essential role in catalyzing the system level transition that we need to see to overcome sort of the current linear status quo. I would go even further than just sort of leveling the playing field to say we should be working to tilt the playing field towards circular practices and products and services and business models. I think that's really what we need to do to drive towards our climate ambitions, to deal with our biodiversity loss issues, to deal with the pollution issues. And governments can play a role in different ways. We're already seeing European Union sort of embracing this, and we're seeing countries like the Netherlands and Finland that have developed visions and circular economy strategies and roadmaps. China's now worked it into their latest five-year plan. So we don't have that yet in Canada, is sort of that overarching circular economy strategy. We have some sector roadmaps in the works for plastics. There's lots of interest in areas like forest bioeconomy and agri-food, but we could be doing more in metals mining and construction, textiles and manufacturing. So opportunities for government to play a role in that sort of strategic setting, strategy setting. I would say also on regulation, Jordy mentioned earlier, extended producer responsibility is one tool, but it's really the full set of regulation that can incentivize business models to transition, to think about full life cycles of their products and second use phases and take back systems and things like design for disassembly and repairability and reusability. The economic instrument side, so taxes, fees, economic incentives that can help to drive this and support business. Procurement's another big one in Canada. About $200 billion is spent annually through public procurement. So the driver or the demand side is really key, and government can play a role there. And lastly, I would just say around sort of education awareness building, that includes skills and workforce development, and also supporting that innovation ecosystem and the collaboration models that are really needed to sort of drive this transition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, lots there. Lots of things that could unpack. We're going to come back to a couple of those themes in a minute, but I also want to come to Jordy, assuming his mic is still with us, just to maybe touch on the differences, because my understanding is that the Netherlands is probably a little ahead of Canada and have already set some either policy or perhaps even regulatory pieces. So Jordy, would you be able to give us a little insight to that? It might be sort of as a roadmap that Canada could look at.
Sure, yeah. So the Netherlands set the goal to be 100% circular in 2050, to be 50% circular in 2030. So those are clear goals that the government has put out a couple of years ago. And what's really noticeable is that the market is really moving towards that goal just because the goal is there. So that besides that, I mean, there's some subsidies, of course, and funds, but there's there hasn't been really legislation or taxation that would actually stimulate the market, but still companies are created just because of this new law. I mean, Chainable wouldn't have existed if the goal wasn't there. Our main customers are basically housing associations, and in the Netherlands, housing associations are semi-government. So they will be the first companies basically that have to switch, that have to become 100% circular, especially because they're the building environment. So their buildings will have to be circular. So they're really looking, I mean, that's what Paul also mentioned, the purchasing side is being pushed there because of the government policy, especially because the semi-government. The other, like, completely the free rental market is also moving, but you really see that it's moving less quickly because they're not governmental. So they don't feel the need yet. And that's because I mean, that's the next step, what the Netherlands needs to take too, is the taxation part, because the business case works, but not quick enough. So right now, the initial investment with circularity is almost always higher. Eventually, the total cost of ownership will be lower. Like, it will pay itself off, but to convince someone that the initial investment price now will be higher is a struggle, and that needs to change.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe just to dig into that just a little bit, it sounds like even the announcement then, would you characterize it as it's actually created at least enough market certainty that it's allowed sort of innovation and some entrepreneurial spirit to step into the space? Is that in essence just the indication is enough to do that? Okay, interesting.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah, a lot of companies popped up just pure with circularity in mind. With the only company goal basically is to become circular. So that's our goal too. And that never happened until 5 years ago.
Okay, yeah. Very interesting. Okay, well, and you touched on something else. I'm going to come over to Zarko now. You touched about, perhaps some incentives or something, sort of in the network, if you will, the broader network. I'd be curious, Zarko, given your company's focus, particularly lithium-ion batteries, what's your experience, or how do you find that in a North American context in terms of, are people interested? Are they waiting for the market to move? Are they waiting for government intervention? Or, what are you seeing there in that space?
Well, there's definitely interest, and I mean, the government intervention in terms of the need for recycling, say in North America, hasn't been as strong. But I see some examples in Europe or Asia where certain percent of recyclability. And then there's also, a lot of government programs that help support the development of projects. I mean, this is, a new technology that needs to be commercialized and needs to grow. So there's a lot of programs out there that do help with that. We've gotten some support as well from the Canadian government. But I think, I mean, it just kind of plays in the hand of, the fans of electric vehicles. I think always tend to ask that question, or even those who aren't fans of electric vehicles, I feel like they always come back with, well, what do you do with the batteries after? So it just kind of, when somebody can tell them, well, there is solutions out there, that's it's always a nice thing to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know I do hear that a lot in the market as well. And maybe it's a catalyst, just the battery from an electric vehicle is large enough that people are taking notice, whereas with their cell phone, they weren't particularly concerned. Sort of some scale there. Actually, great segue too. I wanted to talk about this, near and dear to my sort of career and experience, but also Decentralized Energy Canada. We're sort of talking on the EVs and the battery side, but you do hear a lot of the same sort of issue or question around renewable energy, because of course, generally accepted, we're going to need more, zero carbon renewable energy to power civilization in a future where, we are carbon constrained and we want to be more sustainable. And you do hear a lot about, oh, well, what happens to all those solar panels when they're done? What happens to the wind turbines? To be honest, to wear my bias on my sleeve, I think I have spent more time answering questions around, well, what might happen to solar panels 30 years from now, when I look at many other industries who have never been asked those kinds of questions as to what happens at the end of life for other products. And I'd be curious to come back to our panel a little bit here and get some sense on in terms of circular economy and place we're going. And because I think it would be pertinent to our Decentralized Energy Canada audience. Do you see energy as being more difficult to integrate into circular economy, or less difficult, or is it about the same as everything else and something to be considered? Maybe Adrian, I'll come back to you. I don't know if this is come up a lot with the Standard Council of Canada, but definitely an issue that's out there.
So not getting into that that amount of depth yet with the exploration of how standards could contribute to circular economy, but definitely some harmonization of standards and approaches to ensuring chain of custody would be helpful. So chain of custody means, how do you ensure that as a material kind of changes hands along the value chain, that you know what's in it, you know where it's come from, and you know the composition. This is really important because if we want to bend that linear process from extraction to production to use and end of life into a loop, there needs to be a very good information flow, and the players along the value chain need to be able to talk to each other. So having standards to ensure that that information is maintained and that it's trustworthy and that it really flows along the value chain will be important. So there are efforts right now to standardize even what do we mean by chain of custody. I'm sure there are standards that are already out there or that are in development for things like product passports. So that's one way of keeping that information with the product as it changes hands, and that'll be increasingly important if we want to continue down this path towards circularity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
you do see some of that as well in batteries or pilot programs, and especially with, I think it more so started with the sourcing of cobalt in the battery, where a lot of it was concentrated in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there was more some child labor as well, and then with the consumers not wanting some product like that, you almost kind of need that verification on where did this material really come from. So there is advanced technologies that are helping pilot some of these.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Just as a segue, I actually grew up right beside the town of Cobalt in Northern Ontario, so maybe there's an opportunity there. Anyone listening from Ontario, have a look. You might have the next cobalt source for renewable energy and batteries. But Paul, can I draw you back into this conversation as well around sort of the renewable energy and sustainability conversation and how that fits with the circular economy?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, fundamentally, circular economy processes and business models and supply chains are meant to be regenerative in nature and be powered somewhat by renewable energy at the end of the day. So renewable energy and these technologies all play a large role in a future of a more circular economy. So while we need, I would say, to encourage, those low carbon energy sources or options, we also need to account for the fact that they are more material intensive, and we need to think about their end of life considerations of those technologies. So wind turbines and solar PV, for example, require more material per unit of energy generation relative to fossil fuel-based counterparts, including critical and strategic minerals and metals that are really important to from a near-term economic and geopolitical consideration. I think wind and solar have been identified as requiring 13 of the 31 minerals that have been designated as critical by Canada, and 4 rare earth elements. So need to think about those, and circular economy strategies really can provide the potential to reduce the material intensity of these technologies. They can help to minimize the material loss along their life cycles. You can help to recover the value at their end of life, and also reduce the future volumes of waste that are sent to landfill or other locations. So there was a very good report that was just put out by Smart Prosperity Institute on wind and solar technologies and the circular economy. I can drop a link to that report into the chat box. So I'm borrowing a bit from some of their research. And I would just also add that in the battery space, some work's been done by the World Economic Forum and the Global Battery Alliance that found that could reduce battery costs for production by about 23% by 2030, just by adopting circular economy strategies. So I will drop that into the chat box as well if anybody's interested in that insightful report.
Fantastic value add to our participants today. We're giving they don't even have to go and do their own research. That's fantastic. So Jordy, can I maybe just before we move off this topic, curious if anything you've heard there is sort of different than what you see in in Europe or in Netherlands in particular around how renewable energy and the circular economy come together or need to come together.
Well, as Paul said, I think renewable energy is essential for a circular economy, because in a circular economy, you need more labor and more energy to refurbish all the materials and remanufacture all the materials that you use, and you need to transport more. So in order to do that sustainably, you will have to use renewable sources for all. So eventually, 100% switch to renewables is essential. But yeah, it's definitely not a silver bullet. There are downsides to renewables. And for that, also, as Paul said, we just need to use circular principles in designing these new technologies. So just use the 10R framework of reduce, reuse, and so on, until you have a right solution in which you can use the maximum amount of all the materials that's in there. So yeah, I think my views align with Paul's. It's necessary to have and a material passport for tracking products is great. I think we use it with Chainable too. We have a material passport for all our kitchens, so we know exactly what's in it. I saw a question from Anouk about like decentralized use of blockchain, basically. We don't do that ourselves, but I know that it is being used for material passports. We have sort of a low-tech method of tracking our kitchens.
Excellent. Okay. No, I think interesting how it all sort of comes back. We started talking about some, tracking and life cycle tracking of materials and equipment all the way around, and so back there and seeing how important it sounds like that's going to be going forward. I'm going to bring us back to something that was mentioned a little earlier, actually, which is the extended producer responsibility, because this is one that I'm kind of interested in, and what the different roles are, how it works. I don't know if does somebody want to take maybe just a stab at explaining like what that is to our audience in case they're not familiar, and what common features of extended producer responsibility you'd expect to see. And maybe Paul, I saw your hand move, so I'm going to pick on you.
I was actually just scratching my face, but
okay, well, I'm picking on you anyway. So
extended producer responsibility is sort of the idea that the stewardship of a product is sort of maintained by the producer throughout its lifetime, and at the end of life, the producer is responsible for taking that product back and ideally refurbishing it, repurposing it, extracting the value out of the resources or materials that are part of that product. And so we've had extended producer responsibility in Canada for many years and decades. Some provinces are further ahead than others, but for batteries and other harmful, maybe toxic materials in the environment, like paints and things, tires, there's been extended producer responsibility programs for a while. It's been expanded into bottles and into recycling for plastics and packaging, and now into new potentially areas like textiles and mattresses and furniture and other areas that we haven't quite gotten out in front of, but there's a huge opportunity to use that as a tool or policy regulatory lever to shift sort of the responsibility of these products away from sort of local governments and the consumer from having to deal with them at end of life to the producers, and that's sort of shifting their behavior in terms of how they're thinking about designing those products up front.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe can I ask a clarifying question? Like one of the I suppose, extended producer responsibilities that I'm most familiar with is tires. You know, in most jurisdictions, when you buy your tires, you pay a little fee on the tire, and then in theory, you know, at the end of life, there's a place for those tires to go, and there's an association that's looking after it, and they're trying to work on the, you know, the outcomes and things. But I'm just curious, like, in terms of the circular economy, does that qualify? Because that's the kind of thing that I'm most familiar with. But that isn't, you know, a tire manufacturer per se being responsible. That there's kind of a new association or a new group that's kind of taken on responsibility, you know, at end of life. Do both models work, or is there a preferred process in relation to circular economy in particular? I'll throw that out there to the whole group. I don't know if anyone has you know, thoughts or insights into that.
I could comment on that. Yeah, I think both models work. For me, the main difference is if the product is put out in the business-to-business market or the business-to-consumer market. As for a business-to-business market, a company can really clearly see who its customers are, where the products are, and when they're coming back. But for a consumer, that's much harder because you don't know where the product is going, who's selling it to who after, and stuff like that. So then a centralized hub where stuff is collected, I think works much better for consumers.
Okay, so maybe a couple different models there. I know, Adrian, you mentioned this earlier as well. You know, is this something that you know, Standards Council and in your conversations you're seeing a lot of, this extended producer responsibility concept?
It's certainly part of discussions, but we haven't focused too deeply on the consequences for EPR or what standards might be needed yet. Maybe ask me in a year.
Okay, new and emerging. Okay.
I would imagine Zarko has thoughts there too. Batteries.
I was just going to say we should throw to Zarko because he's kind of, I imagine his business is sitting on the edge of this, sort of saying, "Hey, we have a solution here."
Yeah, it's I mean, that's the thing with the consumer electronics, you know, the smaller devices. I mean, we're seeing like maybe companies like Apple to give back program, some kind of incentive to take these products back and then disassemble them and recycle some of their products. You can even see in some of their latest devices, they're advertising the recyclability of some of these materials. So it's really this new age of the consumers really want to see. And then for electric vehicles, I mean, when you consider how much material is in these batteries, it's not only from the environmental perspective, but it's an incentive for them to get these materials back because, I mean, you know, unfortunately, you do need to mine for the materials that go into a battery, and those mines don't come up fast enough. And you know, then there's going to be supply chain issues with getting some of these materials. So even recycling some of their existing products that are out there, you know, can even help soften that impact on how much is needed. Like, I don't think recycling will take, you know, will be 100% of the material that's used. I think there'll always be a percentage of mined material, but it can really help soften that supply chain gap as well. So there's many positives there for these companies.
That's actually really interesting. I want to pick up on that because I think one of the maybe complaints or challenges that you would hear is that, well, you know, you're going to increase the cost of everything if you make producers responsible or have end of life plans, etc. You know, things will just become unaffordable. You know, Zarko, it sounds like you're sort of saying, well, actually, there could be some upside in this. You know, not having to source new material that's, you know, maybe in short supply, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But again, I'll throw it out to the group. Maybe Zarko, you want to start? I'm sort of curious. Like, can we work this in? I think I see Adrian's hand moving as well. So maybe Zarko, if you have a comment, then we'll go to Adrian and then whoever else wants to weigh in as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's you know, there will be a benefit. Like right now in the battery material space, the prices of these materials are going up. That for the first time now we're seeing a tick up in lithium-ion battery costs. So getting these materials from your, you know, raw materials is going to get costly as this gap in supply widens. So it's recycling can be an economic benefit as well. As I mean, I think we see it like that, and with changing prices, that we'll keep evaluating that. But it is a positive in multiple areas.
Okay, interesting. Adrian, did you have a comment?
Yeah. So with respect to EPR and standards, actually I've just thought of, there is a role that standardization could play. So right now, there isn't too much incentive in the absence of EPR programs for producers to take back, right? Because there's a market failure. Like you don't currently have price signals that facilitate that behavior. But one of the ways that standardization, like traditionally, one of its functions is actually variety reduction. Sometimes you have too much variety of a thing, and sometimes you just have to reduce that to simplify the options available. And you could argue that one of the reasons why recycling is so expensive is because there's just so many different types of plastics and combinations of plastics and colors, material compositions, and so on and so forth. And that gets in the way of real circularity of plastics, right? So what if standardization could be, that process could be used to try to reduce it down to a smaller number of types of plastics, of colors of plastics, so that the system could work better.
Interesting concept. Yeah, maybe just on that topic, Paul or Jordy, any comments you guys wanted to throw in here around the extended responsibility and cost?
Yeah, sure. And mainly about the cost that you mentioned, because I believe that circularity will eventually always be cheaper. Because there's no way that our raw materials are going to get cheaper. They're only going to get more expensive. And if you truly have extended producer responsibility, then as a producer, you know exactly where your products are. And then if you design them correctly in order to be reassembled and to be taken back, then you have a massive raw material, or not even raw material, just a massive product warehouse out in the world. And you know exactly when it's coming back to you. So that is what we have with Chainable, for example, as well. We know exactly which products are out there, we know when they're coming back, and we know what's in it. So not only for ourselves, for the stuff that we can use directly ourselves, but also for our producers, for our entire supply chain. We can tell them, hey guys, at this date in 2040, you're going to get 10,000 hinges from us. Do something with them. So that is a massive advantage of the circular economy in a time where raw materials are only getting more expensive. We'll eventually have a database of cheap materials.
Very interesting. Paul, anything from you on this one?
Just add that the risk is that the costs get passed to the consumer to some degree, but at the same time, the innovate, if we can find a way to incentivize the innovation around design of new products, and that's really what EPR can be designed to do, is where we'll start to see the cost savings or the benefits for products, and really helping those corporates and others think about new business models and new service delivery models like repair and reuse, and starting to think about how they make their products more durable and last longer, so that they can actually potentially leverage some of those other economic opportunities or revenue models. Just in the battery space, I'll just point out that I think about 60% of the cost of battery recycling is from the logistics and the collection and moving those batteries to where they can be recycled and processed. So we need to think about the infrastructure and the collection and the sorting systems and how we can centralize those or make them more efficient. And that will actually help bring the costs down too, so that EPR is not something that's hard to manage.
Interesting. Well, I got to say, like, what I'm drawing out of this, which I hadn't really appreciated, was it's the front end piece. I sort of think you hear, extended responsibility. Okay, what am I going to do with it later when it's considered waste? But actually, the influence or the focus on how do we design better? How do we build better? How do we come up with more consistent standard, if you will, so that it makes the back end much easier to handle. But I find that a really interesting concept, one that I hadn't sort of fully appreciated coming into this. So appreciate all those comments. I think maybe what we'll do now, just looking at the time, we'll take a few questions from the audience, if you will. So audience, if you have a question, get it into the Q&A slot. I will pick a few of these. I apologize in advance if we don't get to all of them. We'll see what we can do, but we'll start to run through a few of those. So we'll do some questions, and then I will come back to the panelists to do sort of a last thought to leave you with wrap up. So panelists, while you're not answering a guest question, you can be thinking about your final statement, how you're going to impress us as we go about it the rest of our afternoon. But maybe we'll start to pick through a few questions here. There is one, I know, Paul, I don't know how you managed to do this. You got more documents going into our chat and links. You must just have them on your desktop or something.
My fingertip.
So, I encourage everybody to have a look there. But the concept of blockchain technology for the tracking of these resources, some work being done on it. I know I've seen blockchain used and proposed for numerous things. I'm going to throw it to the panel. Do you see this as, blockchain distributed ledger technology being a really big help in this space, or do you see it as just another way of tracking, or what's the sense out there in the market?
Yeah, I won't consider myself an expert, but early in our development, we got in touch with a company called Circular, and it's essentially exactly what they're doing with the blockchain and tracking. We were still R&D stages, and I mean, they're not commercialized yet, so weren't able to see it really play through on a commercial scale. But we saw examples of how it works into the supply chain, from the production of materials, and it's scanned in, and certain values are documented, and then that moves on to the next location, and that's scanned in, and all of that is mapped out. And I thought this very, very clever way of managing that. And I've seen their development since then, and I think I've gone into even more depth with it, with I think even CO2 emission tracking. So I highly recommend somebody to look at them there.
Okay, interesting. Anyone else on that topic before I jump to the next one?
I'll just add that there's a number of initiatives underway right now that are trying to use blockchain for better traceability that will help understand, as Darko mentioned, things like LCA, life cycle emissions, and tracking materials throughout the value chain. I dropped that report in there where we had a couple presenters speak to it, one out of Luxembourg that's been working on what's called the product circularity data sheet, and it's a platform that they're now turning into an ISO standard to make it international. And essentially it's a digital fingerprint for products using blockchain on the back end, or open data back end. And the BC government's also working on something like that for mining and materials, called their sort of digital wallet. So transferability of different credentials, or I guess information about a product as it moves through the value chain.
So what it sounds like to me is that, yes, there is lots going on in this space in terms of how these new, we'll call them, tracking technology, ledger technologies may be applicable. So I think there's the answer there. Another question I'm going to jump to here, it's in the same theme of this extended producer responsibility. And I think what the question is driving at here is that obviously there are sort of federal, perhaps provincial targets or mandates that could be put in place. What about the municipal level? I'll throw it to anyone on the panel who likes to get into it. Do municipal governments have a role in that extended producer responsibility, or is it something that really needs to be handled at a higher level of government? So, any thoughts there?
I can start. I think the question is sort of getting at the fact that we have different levels of government that are responsible for different areas of jurisdiction, and that can be a really challenging space for circular economy when you need to be thinking about the system when it's not harmonized across different levels of government. That can be EPR, it can be other areas, but in terms of local governments or their role, they often are involved with residential and ICI sector and construction and demolition waste, and dealing with some of those those pieces downstream. So lots of opportunity to innovate sort of around the bylaws to support, things like deconstruction over demolition. There's some control over land use and how to, build the infrastructure and the communities that enable circular economy through density and other planning. There's the opportunity around, innovation and incubation of business models that are circular economy, and the role that local governments can play to demonstrate, give opportunities for business to demonstrate circular economy solutions in their communities. And I would just go back to the point that, doing kind of bans and regulation in one city has a challenging impact if it's not harmonized across other levels of government. So finding ways to work together to kind of standardize almost the regulations that are being developed will help to drive the circular economy and avoid some of the risk in that side of things.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the municipal side of things versus higher levels? Consistency standards?
I think that, like municipalities, there's probably some creative things that municipalities can do to enable circular economy. And this kind of connects to, I see a chat question from Lindsay, hi Lindsay, about what rural/remote municipalities can do. So remember, like circular economy, it doesn't have to be high tech, right? It can be as simple as virtual marketplace where people can say, hey, I've got extra of this thing, who needs it? There's nonprofit organizations and there's apps that connect people and businesses who have excess food with people and organizations that need the food. And you could do that for apparel, you could do that for commercial goods. There's a lot of interesting examples internationally as well. Japan has quite a few of these like B2B platforms that allow companies to basically kind of trade off excess inventory of things. And so circular economy can be quite simple that way. And I think municipalities could encourage that, perhaps by providing space, maybe through zoning or some other way for those activities to happen, maybe even small grants to help these organizations facilitate this very good work, and just make sure that circular economy is available to small businesses and kind of everyday households as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know that we were going to go to the rural question. So that is, it's sort of one of is there an economy of scale that is required here or not, I guess, to participate? It sounds like, depending on, what your focus is, obviously, it sounds like the spectrum is very broad. Jordi, I'd love to pull you back in and just see, is there examples from, the Netherlands, which is, obviously densely populated, quite small. Do municipalities play a big role there? Is it the national government? How are things being organized there?
I guess it trickles down. So we do have the national policy, but definitely municipalities, especially in the bigger cities, are very important for enabling the local economy to actually shift. I think our rural areas are not really comparable to Canadian rural areas. We drive 20 minutes and you're in a city. That's not the same in Canada. So in that sense, it's definitely different, but I don't think that should be a hurdle for the circular economy. I think circular economy principles can be applied to any part of the economy, basically, and that doesn't matter how big or small that economy is. Especially as Adrian already mentioned, there's plenty of examples of things you can do in the local small community, where the local community can keep the materials local and also reuse those materials locally.
I can add a bit to that, John, if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just there's some good examples across Canada and certainly lots of international ones. But in British Columbia, where I'm based, There are examples like Metal Tech Alley and Trail, which is a more rural community where they've kind of built on their industrial strengths to create a circular metals and mining innovation cluster, building off tech and their battery recycling facility, and now linking it in with the university or the college, I should say, and a bunch of startups and SME entrepreneurs to kind of create a local cluster focused on circular economy. And the Economic Development Agency for the region has been working with the local governments to help enable that and support that. Quesnel is another city in BC where they're focused on bioeconomy, forest bioeconomy, and mass timber, and creating kind of the linkages around circular economy and circular bioeconomy for wood. So finding some of those strengths, maybe. There's an initiative called the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative in Canada that's working on roadmaps for 15 communities of different sizes, some of which are more rural and remote. So the outcomes from that work might help to provide some insights for other local governments wanting to sort of move in that direction and learn from some of these smaller communities and the roadmaps are developing.
Interesting. Actually, no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because to be honest, for a battery storage project that I was involved in a couple of years ago here, in order to get it permitted, we needed a basically an end-of-life path, and it was the recycler in BC that became the path. And I just thought the irony of I'm in Calgary, having to go to a relatively small place in southern BC to be the end-of-life path for the battery, when we got to that point in time, not for another decade, but needed to have the plan. So it's sort of interesting. Maybe last question that we'll take from the chat here, because I see we've had a bunch come in and we're slowing down, but it's to shift the conversation a little bit to ESG, and just we hear a lot about environmental social governance, ESG. It's playing a bigger role in all sorts of large corporations, well, actually large and small, public and private. I'm sort of curious if maybe we can go around the table and just sort of say, hey, are you seeing the circular economy and its concepts come up in those ESG discussions? Are you hearing about it from that side? Or perhaps not. Is it a gap that isn't there when ESG gets talked about? It's not one of the traditional pieces that gets looked at. So I'd just be curious to know where the fit is, just because this is becoming such a big movement globally. Is there a big role that circular economy could play in that space? So I'll throw it to the whole panel. Actually, whoever would like to jump in and start. I see,
Sure.
see Adrian's hand, so let's start with her. Yeah.
Sure, I'll start. So it's complicated for sure. The ESG landscape itself is so complicated. There are, I think, hundreds of standards and approaches to ESG measurement and metrics. And there's so many indicators that can be used to measure a company's kind of progress or performance on any of those dimensions: environmental, social, or governance. And the question is just starting, actually. So I'm part of a group of Canadians that's feeding into efforts at the international level to develop ISO standards for circular economy. And that's exactly what experts are grappling with now is, okay, how are we going to measure circularity? What's included in circularity? Should it include governance considerations, or is circular economy sort of a subset of the broader ESG consideration? So still very much being worked through, but I think the consensus so far is that you cannot consider something to be a circular economy solution if you completely ignore, say, social or governance. There has to be some consideration there. So I think you'll see an embedding. Once we agree on circular economy indicators, you'll see an embedding of circularity indicators in other ESG frameworks. But for sure, there needs to be a convergence towards fewer frameworks so that we can actually have some comparability across some countries.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Others, I know, Zarko, are you having, conversations like this with companies looking for their ESG solution through, their battery end of life, that kind of process?
Yeah, I mean, there's companies right now that as they're growing, they coming from a few tons of end of life batteries to foreseeing a few thousand as everything kind of gets converted. So both on the looking for the technology, but also, the ESG aspect to it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, good. Paul, Jordy, either of you, both of you, any comment on this one?
I'm going to grab a coffee. I'll be back.
Jordy dropped in a good link, I think, from the Ellen
Yeah, I
MacArthur
just dropped in a
Foundation.
link from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. That's good research anyway. If you guys, if somebody didn't know it yet, Ellen MacArthur Foundation is sort of the forefront of the circular economy in terms of knowledge base. And yeah, I believe even though it might not be embedded in the ESGs, the circular economy is the single best solution to get to the ESG goals of companies, because it just touches upon a lot of different topics within the ESG framework, I think.
Yeah, we've been working a bit with some companies on linking their SDG commitments to an ESG to circular economy. And I think it's important that we don't think of circular economy as a new reporting structure, a new system that we need to be thinking about. It's a set of strategies that help us deliver deeper greenhouse gas emissions, help to bring some social inclusion and equity, and actually address, adopting circular economy addresses many of the SDGs, if not all of them, to some degree, if we're thinking about it as a system.
For sure. I think it's a solution for the goals that have been set there already.
Very interesting. Great. Okay, we are approaching that time. What I'd like to do is just go around our panel here for maybe a last thought. This is your chance to leave our audience with your defining point of the day, perhaps, as we go around. So let's do that. Just before we do that, I'm going to suggest anyone who's watching, if you haven't been in the chat, compared to virtually any webinar I've ever been in, there are more resources now in that chat. So get in there and copy the links, because it will save you hours of Google searching later, if you're interested in this and you want to follow up. So please do that. But maybe we can finish with a roundtable here, and we'll go in the same order that we started. So Adrian, your sort of defining last thought you'd like to leave our audience with.
Sure. I think that people don't often think about standards, but standards are so important to our daily lives, right? They're present in an invisible way in all the things that we use and all the ways that we move around our cities. And they're so important to health, to safety, and increasingly for environmental considerations. And as you kind of move forward in your careers or about your work, think about, and you're trying to solve a problem, first go see if there's a standard on that. And there probably is. ISO has tens of thousands of standards on virtually any topic under the sun, and they were built by international consensus. So look there first, and check out SEC, so sec.ca. We also have a catalog of national standards of Canada. And if the standard that you're looking for doesn't exist, contact your member body. If you're Canadian, that would be SEC, and ask how you can get involved in maybe helping to create one.
Excellent, appreciate that. Zarko.
Yeah, I mean, the thought I'd like to leave is really the difference. I know we use recycling a lot, but you mentioned it as well, which is upcycling, and how we kind of try and define our process, because I think recycling a lot of times is left to many interpretations. It can just be more so the breaking down of materials into individual components, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's circular. Maybe it's especially for batteries, if you're going to have circular economy in batteries, you're going to want to take the material back to the quality it's required for it to go back in the battery. But many times, if it's not to that grade, it'll go into maybe another industry, or the recovery rates will be lower. And then that's not very circular in my mind. So we really like to define it as upcycling, so creating more value out of that material, not just breaking it down, but creating it back into a usable high value product. For batteries, it would be like precursor materials, cathode active materials that are intended for future battery production. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. No, thank you, and good on you for jumping in, because I just realized I changed up my own order and called on you and not Jordy, but we'll go there next. So Jordy, your final thoughts.
Oh, good. Well, I believe that the circular economy really is happening, and it's better to be part of that transition sooner than later. So I would say just hop on the circular economy train, and just in anything you do, whether it's in business through your suppliers or your customers, or your own products that you produce, or as a consumer, always wonder or ask, hey, can I bring this product back to you? Do you take this product back, or how else are we going to fix what's in this product, and where should I leave it? So always ask that question whenever you buy or purchase a product or a service, I believe.
Excellent. Okay, Paul, last word from you.
Yeah, I think if we want to fix the climate challenge we're facing, we have to transform our economy. And it's not only about how our economy is powered, it's consideration for the emissions and the resource use of the products and materials and their embedded carbon, as well as the impact on land use that kind of comes from our current linear system approach. And we're a resource-rich country, so circular economy is going to look different for Canada than it does for the Netherlands or for Europe or for China. In a sense, we have opportunities to do more in the space of, say, the bioeconomy, where we produce many of the materials that are needed for a circular economy globally, as well as the opportunity to use our minerals or metals and look at closed loop or opportunities for supply chain recovery and economic opportunities in that sort of rethink of how our supply chains work. And I think it's really important that we don't think about circular economy as being insular or closed off from the rest of the world, but rather about how we can strengthen our supply chains, extract the maximum value out of our resources, and remain globally competitive in this sense, since we're already seeing billions being invested by some of our competing nations or countries. And I think what gets me most excited is about the new entrepreneurship opportunities and the innovation and the collaboration that comes out of kind of rethinking this system, the new business models, and really the opportunity to create jobs and look at new opportunities for Canada.
Excellent. I appreciate all of that. Great conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. I am going to close with this one. This just popped up in the chat. This has never happened to me in 20 odd years of working in sort of the environment, climate change, sustainability fields. Somebody, Lindsay, who asked a question earlier, is in Haileybury, which is a small town in Northern Ontario, right beside the town of Cobalt that I mentioned earlier, where I just happened to spend the first 16 years of my life. And I'll tell you, that has never happened in any webinar that I have ever been on, that somebody was sitting in Haileybury, Ontario. So, Lindsay, good to know you're there. It's fantastic. Small world. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. But anyway, I digress. Thank you very much to our panelists. This has been great. Jordy, we know we're taking up your evening due to that time zone issue, being from the Netherlands. Really appreciate you hanging around on the computer late into the evening to take part in our conversation. Paul, Adrian, Zarko, thanks very much. And to the audience, glad you could join us today. I hope you found it useful. Be sure to get in touch with Decentralized Energy Canada if you have some follow-up, or there's other topics in this series that you want to learn more about. Appreciate you all being here, and thanks very much. We'll talk again soon.